Welcome to Wheelock's Latin Chapter 8. In this chapter, we're going to be discussing third conjugation verbs. We're going to be looking at how to conjugate them in the present system. That's going to include the present tense, the imperfect tense, and the future tense. We'll also be looking at how to form the third conjugation imperatives, and we'll also be looking at a few third conjugation verbs that have an irregular singular form in the imperative. Let's jump into this lesson. Now, previously, we've studied and looked at our different conjugations and the paradigm verbs that we've learned for them. For first conjugation, we learned laudo, laudari, laudavi, laudatum, meaning to praise. We've also learned the second conjugation paradigm verb, moneo, moneri, monui, monetum. And the verb means to warn or to advise. So we've learned in Chapter 1 how to conjugate both first and second conjugation verbs in the present tense. And then in a subsequent chapter, we learned how to conjugate these verbs in the imperfect and future tense. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at third conjugation. And our paradigm for third conjugation is ago, ageri, egi, actum. And this verb means to do or to make or to drive. And it's used quite frequently in Latin, so this will be a very helpful paradigm verb for us. So let's take a look at how we do present tense, how we conjugate present tense for third conjugation. Now, if you remember your first conjugation verbs in the second principal part, lado, ladari, we had that long A, and that's the telltale sign. That long A in the second principal part, or the infinitive, tells us that's first conjugation. For second conjugation, moneo, moneri, that long E in the infinitive, the second principal part, is the telltale sign of a second conjugation verb. Well, if you notice here in the third conjugation, ago, ageri, we have an E, but it's a short E, ageri. And so short E is the telltale sign or the indicator of a third conjugation verb. So that's where you always need to go, is to that second principal part, and then you'll be able to determine which conjugation it is. And this is going to be very important because this is where in third conjugation we're going to see a significant change in how we conjugate in the present tense and in the future tense. So let's look at this. If you remember, our pattern was we take the second principal part and we drop the re, or the infinitive ending at the end of that word, and that gives us our stem. So here we have age. This is our stem. However, this is what makes third conjugation unique. We're going to shorten that E to a short I. So instead of age, age, it's going to be age with an I. The other thing you need to note is that in the first person singular, the I is going to disappear, and then in third person plural, you're going to shift from an I to a U. Okay, so I want you to just kind of look at this and soak this in a little bit. We've shifted from a short E to an I. And then in two places, we're going to have an additional shift. First person singular, that vowel drops away. And that's not uncommon. We've actually seen that before in first conjugation verb amo, or laudo, first conjugation verbs, that lauda, laudari, that A dropped off because it just sounds weird to say lauda, laudao, that A sort of coalesced or merged into that O, so it dropped away. Well, here this I is going to drop away. So that's actually not too surprising. What is going to be a little surprising is the shift in third person plural from an I to a U. Let's see what this is going to look like. Oh, and of course, we add our present tense endings, which we've already learned. OST, mus, tis, nt. Now, I'll remind you, first person singular is an O sometimes, and sometimes it's an M. That'll come in. That'll be important here in just a few minutes. So OST, mus, tis, nt, these are our present tense endings. And let's make the shift here. The I goes away in first person singular, and the I in third person plural shifts to a U. And so here's what we end up with. Ago, agis, agit, agimus, agitus, agunt. Say that out loud. We'll do it a couple of times here. Ago, agis, agit, agimus, agitus, agunt. Ago, agis, agit, agimus, agitus, agunt. Ago, agis, agit, agimus, agitus, agunt. And you just need to practice saying those repeatedly until you kind of get that pattern in your head. But this is the standard paradigm for third conjugation verbs in the present tense E shifts to an I, disappears in first singular, shifts to a U in third plural. So again, a go, a gis, a get, a gimus, a gittis, a goont. All right, so I would take the time to pause this here and maybe just practice handwriting it out. Practice conjugating this verb. It's very helpful to do it, get hands-on here. So I would practice several times conjugating this verb in present tense. All right, assuming that you have practiced that, we're going to move on and see what this looks like in imperfect tense. Now, the good news for imperfect tense is that it's actually just like first and second conjugation. So this one, imperfect, is not going to pose a lot of problems. Again, we're going to take our stem, age, from the infinitive, ageti, and we're going to actually make that E a long E. That's all we're doing here. It shifts from a short E to a long E. And you remember our imperfect tense endings that we've already learned. Bom, bas, bot, bamus, batis, bont. Bom, bas, bot, bamus, batis, bont. And we just add that to the stem, age. Remember that G is a hard sound in classical Latin. It's not ej, not ajabam. It's agabam, agebam, agebam, agebas, agebat, agebamus, agebatis, agebant. So that's how you do imperfect. Again, this one shouldn't pose too many problems since it's the same imperfect endings and the stem is pretty standard. It just shifted to a long E instead of a short E. That's third conjugations in the imperfect. Now, out of all three tenses, the future tense is the one that poses the most trouble for new Latin students. So let's take a look at this and see if we can't process this. It's actually not too bad. It's just surprising. Let's take a look. All right, this is third conjugation future tense. Now, again, we're going to take our ageti, drop the RE, and gives us the AGE stem. So let's take a look at that. Very good. Now, what we're actually going to do is keep that AGE, mostly. In the first person singular, it's actually going to change to an A. I know what you're thinking. Latin can be such a pain sometimes. But here in first person singular, it changes to an A. Now, if you notice, the rest of them are all E's. Some of them are a long E and some are a short E, but that's based on the standard rules for when we have a macron. And we'll go over that in class again if you have a hard time, or you can go back and look at the rules in Wheelock's text. But basically, AGA, first person singular, AGE in every other form. Some of them are long and some are short. Second person singular is long, first and second plural is long, and the rest are short. And to that, now here's the big kicker, okay? I know we've learned future tense endings are bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt. But here's the big thing to hold on to. We use the present tense endings for third conjugation and fourth conjugation in the future. Here's the rule. Use present tense endings in future tense. So again, first person singular is either O or an M. This time we're going with the M. MST, mustisent. And we're, of course, going to merge that with our stem, and we end up with a gam, a guess, a get, a gamus, a getis, a gent. A gam, a guess, a get, a gamus, a getis, a gent. So this is our third and fourth. This is going to be important because if we learn this now and really, really well, and we get this hammered down, fourth conjugation is not going to pose any problem because it has the exact same rules that third conjugation does. So this is really important that we get this nailed down now. So let's take a look at this in the big picture. Here is the present system, present tense, imperfect tense, and future tense. And the reason why we call this the present tense is all three of these are formed from the second principal part. And this is different than the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect, which will come from the third principal part. And then we'll call that system the perfect system, but we'll get to that later. So all three of these make up the present system. Now let's look at, again, present tense. We have a go, a gis, a get, a gimus, a gittis, a gunt. That short E from A-G-E-R-E, ageti, second principal part, R-E drops off. The E shifts to an I. It drops away in the first person singular, and then in third plural shifts to a U. So we end up with a gunt. And the translation for this is I lead, or you lead, he leads, we lead, you lead, and they lead. Now for imperfect, again, this one is probably the easiest of the three. We take the standard imperfect endings, bom, ba, spot, bombas, batas, bont, and we add the AGE, which we would expect. AG from ageri, just drop the RE, we end up with an AGE, and we add that together. Agebam, agebas, agebat, agebamus, agebatus, agebant. That translates to I was leading, you were leading, he was leading, we were leading, you all were leading, and they were leading. And then finally the future tense. This one, again, is a little bit more complex, but we have mostly the E connecting vowel. You see it in the second person and third person singular, and then first, second, and third person plural. It, however, is not in first singular. It's an A. So we've shifted to an A in first singular. And then on top of that, we're going to use present tense endings instead of future endings. And we go with the MST, mustis, nt, and we end up with agam, ages, aget, agemus, agetus, agent. The translation is I will lead, you will lead, he will lead, we will lead, you all will lead, and they will lead. So this is the paradigm for third conjugation verbs. All third conjugation verbs act like this, and so do fourth conjugations. So I would really advise to take some time to process this, hand write out, hand conjugate on some paper, and just practice conjugating in all three tenses, various third conjugation verbs. You can find them in the vocab list for Chapter 8. Now, if you want, go ahead and pause, take some time. You can come back in just a minute and finish the lesson. Okay, now that you're back, we've got imperatives. Now, imperatives, you've already learned the rule for this, and this is, for the most part, pretty straightforward here. Here's our paradigm verbs for first, second, third, fourth, and third IO verbs. Again, we're not worried about fourth and third IO at this point. We're only worried about first, second, and now third conjugation. So here we go. Lado, ladari, ladawi, ladatum, monoo, moneri, monoi, monotum, ago, ageti, egi, actum. So again, we're going to take the second principal part, ladari, moneri, and ageti. We're going to take those, and we're going to drop off that RE, the infinitive ending, and that is going to give us our imperative singular. So we end up with lada, monet, age. That's pretty standard. So third conjugation verb holds the same pattern that we've already learned. Just drop that RE and you end up with the imperative singular. And that's going to translate to praise, just like command to one person, or monet, warn, to one, and then lead to one person, age. Now the plural was formed by taking that same stem, lada, and adding a te. So we got ladate, praise, to more than one person, a command to more than one person. Monet becomes monete, warn, again, to more than one person. Now here, again, third conjugation you got to pay attention to. It's not just the A-G-E-T-E, but that short E once again shifts to an I. So we end up with agite, lead, a command to more than one person, agite. So third conjugation verbs vary here or shift the pattern in that the TE doesn't just get added to the stem. We have to shift the E to an I, agite. So that's, there you can see the note there, nota bene. In third conjugation verbs, the short E vowel changes to an I in the imperative plural. Now, one final thing. Once again, there we go, got to circle that so you get to that. There are four fairly often used third conjugation verbs that act a little irregular in the singular. And here are some verbs here: dico, diceri, to speak; duco, duceri, to lead; facao, faceri, to make or to do; and fero, fereri. That last one is a very special form. You can see it's not an E-R-E, it's F-E-R-R-E. It means to bear or carry. We'll talk about that one much later, but here's what happens. Again, you take that R-E off. There you go, drop that infinitive. And you would expect this to be the imperative singular: dice, duce, face, ferrer. Again, don't really worry about that last one because it's a special case. But actually, the E actually drops off here on these, and we end up with dic. Here we go, there's the note in third conjugation verbs. The short E vowel drops in the imperative singular, so we end up with dic, duc, fac, and fer. and that's the imperative singular. Now, the imperative plural has the same rule we've already had here. We changed that connecting vowel to an I and had the TE. So we end up with diciti, duciti, faciti, and again, ferte, but again, that last one is really irregular. We'll talk about that later. So that's 4 irregular third conjugation verbs, imperatives that act just a little bit different in the singular. Drop that E, not just the RE, but drop the ERE to get the imperative singular. All right, that's our lesson. Make sure you hit your vocabulary up, and we will have a quiz later on this. Y'all have a great day.